My son's fiancé looked me in the eye and said, "We only want important people at the wedding." The next morning, I opened the guest list. My name and all my lifelong friends were gone. It cut deeper than any blade. After decades of sacrifice, I was reduced to nothing but a forgotten seat by the kitchen door. But while they thought I'd stay silent, I was already holding documents that could turn the entire wedding upside down. And when I finally revealed the truth, the $200, $1,000 wedding crumbled before their eyes. Want to know what happened when my son had to choose between his fiancée and his own father? Stay with me until the end of this story. Then comment the city you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. The envelope lay on the table longer than it should have. Heavy cardstock, embossed in gold, the kind of thing meant to impress. My hands lingered before opening it, as if they already knew what waited inside. The invitation to Damon's wedding, something a father should treasure. The script was elegant, the names bold across the top. Damon Kraft and Marcellus Gacy invite you. My eyes moved slowly down the page, looking for my place. Then I saw it, a simple line tucked in the corner. Guest, not father of the groom, not Luther Jesperson, just a vague, disposable word. It felt like the room shrank around me, years of working 2 jobs. Years of keeping a roof over Damon's head. Every sacrifice, it all collapsed into that single omission, reduced to a line of ink that could have been anyone. The paper trembled in my hands. I pressed it flat, tried to steady myself, but the words blurred. Later that night, the apartment felt smaller than usual. The clock ticked louder. The fridge hummed longer. I sat in my worn armchair, the invitation propped against a lamp. A father was supposed to be a part of his son's greatest day, not erased from it. The memories pressed in hard, raising Damon, carrying him on my shoulders through Boston winters, standing in the bleachers during high school games. He had been everything, and now, he couldn't even name me. I tried to push away the bitterness, but it seeped through every corner of the room, the kind of loneliness that no quiet could cover. Dinner was supposed to be a bridge. Damon called, said Marcellus wanted to meet me properly before the big day. I agreed, holding on to hope that maybe the invitation had been a mistake. The restaurant was upscale, all polished wood and hushed voices. Damon looked nervous, adjusting his tie, while Marcellus leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp, smile rehearsed. We exchanged pleasantries. He asked about my line of work, retired now, though I told him about years in construction. He nodded with the faintest smirk, as though filing the detail away under ordinary. The conversation shifted toward appearances, the importance of the wedding's guest list, the kind of people they hoped would attend. Every word was coated in polish, yet carried a quiet sting. I listened, steady, unwilling to give him the reaction he seemed to want. It came sharper than expected. "We only want important people there tomorrow," Marcellus said, his smile turning cold. The air collapsed into silence. Damon dropped his gaze, tracing circles on his napkin. My chest burned hot, a mix of humiliation and fury that no words could soften. The insult was deliberate, crafted to wound deeper than the missing name on the invitation ever could. My fork rested untouched, my voice caught in my throat, and in that silence, something hardened inside me. When I rose to leave, my chair scraped the floor louder than it should have. I turned once, eyes fixed on Marcellus. "You'll learn soon enough what importance truly means." The words lingered in the air as I stepped out into the Boston night. Cold wind swept across the street, biting through my jacket. My footsteps echoed on the pavement, each one carrying the weight of betrayal, each one pushing toward something inevitable. The city lights blurred as I walked. Somewhere behind me, laughter resumed at the table, but the storm was no longer outside. It was in me, waiting. The morning crept in through the blinds, faint light spilling across the worn floorboards. Sleep had barely touched me. Marcellus's words still rang in my head like a hammer on cold steel. The silence in my apartment felt thicker than usual, the kind that pressed down on the chest until breathing itself seemed like a labor. A simple breakfast sat untouched on the table. the eggs cooling before I even picked up the fork. The taste of food didn't matter anymore. My phone buzzed with a notification, the glow cutting through the dim room. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won out. A forwarded email blinked open, unassuming, just another detail of the wedding arrangements. But when my eyes settled on the updated guest list, the fork fell from my hand with a clatter that echoed too loudly in the stillness. Names I'd expected to see. Orville Speck, my friend of 40 years, the man who stood by me through the toughest seasons, were gone, one by one. Every familiar figure, every shoulder I had leaned on, and every soul who had walked life beside me, had been erased from the page. In their place were strangers, investors, distant acquaintances of Marcellus, names that meant nothing to me. The realization cut deeper than the missing line of ink that had left me as a guest. This wasn't just exclusion, this was erasure. They want my money, not my presence, whispered the thought I'd been resisting. The truth slid in like a knife. It wasn't about honor, or family, or even appearances. It was about control, prestige, a curated picture of a world where I didn't belong. By afternoon, my hands trembled not from age but from fury held too tightly in the chest. I pressed the call button and waited for Damon's voice. When it came, it was uncertain, thin, like he already knew what I'd seen. "Dad, hey," he started, hesitant. "Damon," I answered, steady as stone. "Why are the names missing? Why is Orville not on that list? Why am I reading about strangers taking seats that belong to family?" His voice faltered. It's not me, Dad. Marcellus thinks it's better for appearances. He says people of influence." "Appearances?" My voice sharpened before I could stop it. "And you agreed? You let him decide who is worthy to witness your wedding, who is worthy to stand by you." Silence crackled over the line. Then, weakly, I didn't want to fight him. That cut deeper than anything Marcellus had ever said. My son, the boy I carried on my shoulders, the man I hoped would stand tall, would not defend me. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, cowardly, and all the more painful for it. I ended the call before my voice could break. The rage inside had no outlet, just a slow burn that refused to die. And then the text arrived, casual, like an afterthought. "Luther, make sure to rent a tuxedo from Franklin Row. It'll look better in the photos. We wouldn't want anything awkward." Every word dripped with polished cruelty. They didn't want me present as myself. They wanted me dressed, packaged, staged, as though I were an embarrassment to be disguised under expensive fabric. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a demand. Another way to strip me of dignity, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a hollow man in their curated picture. The phone slid from my hand onto the table. The weight of it seemed heavier than stone. My gaze drifted to the framed photo of Damon as a boy, no more than 10. His grin wide and innocent, a gap where his front teeth hadn't yet grown in. That child had looked at me like I was the strongest man in the world. Now, the man he had become looked at me like I was disposable. "They can strip away my seat, my words, my friends," I whispered into the empty room. "But they won't strip away who I am." The words hung there, both promise and warning, as the shadows of the Boston skyline stretched longer across the window. Somewhere beyond those walls, the wedding clock ticked closer, each second a reminder of the storm building within me. The rehearsal hall glowed with chandeliers and the smell of polished wood. Families hurried in and out, arms full of garment bags, flowers, and chatter about tomorrow. I walked slowly through the glass doors, nodding politely when eyes flicked toward me. Some returned a quick smile. Others whispered as if I were a stranger wandering in by mistake. Each step echoed louder in my ears than the bustle around me. The air inside was too staged, too formal. My hands found their way into my pockets to keep them from trembling. After years of giving everything I had to raise Damon, I never thought I'd have to steel myself like this just to attend my own son's wedding rehearsal. I told myself to stand tall. Dignity would be my armor. At the entrance stood a large easel holding a decorative chart with gold lettering, names neatly printed beneath table numbers. Guests clustered around it, laughing as they found their names beside friends and family. I stepped closer, searching carefully. There was Damon, right in the center, surrounded by his fiancée's relatives. Nearby were cousins, business partners, and what looked like friends of Marcellus's family. Finally, I found my own name, not near the center, not even along the sides. My name sat alone, tucked against the edge of the chart, table 12, pressed against the kitchen doors. The words blurred for a moment, table 12, as if decades of sacrifice were worth nothing more than a seat beside the swinging doors where servers would rush in and out with trays of food. After all I've built, they sit me with the staff, I muttered beneath my breath. I walked the path toward that table, forcing my face to remain calm. The clatter of plates and the occasional shout of "coming through" spilled from the kitchen. A draft swept across the spot. Chairs scraped as strangers shuffled around. These weren't family, not even familiar faces from my neighborhood, just people placed here to fill seats. I smiled politely at them, nodded in acknowledgement, then pulled back. To sit would be to surrender. Instead, I let silence wrap around me. Silence has a weight to it. It speaks louder than protest when wielded right. I turned as laughter rang out from the central tables. Damon was laughing with Marcellus, his hand on his fiancée's shoulder. I waited for his eyes to meet mine, to notice where his father had been assigned, but Damon kept his gaze fixed away. Then I heard the quick patter of small feet. "Grandpa?" Kendra's voice rang bright, cutting through the ache. She ran up with a grin and tugged at my sleeve. "You're sitting way back here?" she asked, peering at the table card in my hand. Her eyes widened, and then she said it, plain as only a child could. "Mom said you're not sitting with us because you're not important for the pictures." The words sliced through me deeper than any insult Marcellus had ever delivered. Out of the mouths of babes comes the cruelest honesty. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile for her sake. "Pictures can be tricky things, sweetheart," I whispered, brushing her hair gently. "Don't you worry about where I sit." She beamed and ran off toward her cousins, her laughter fading into the crowd. I stood frozen, her innocent remark echoing again and again inside, not important for the pictures. I stepped aside, away from the noise, away from the draft of the kitchen doors. The hurt pulsed in silence, but resolve rose with it. My eyes lifted, not to the crowd but past them, seeing further than tomorrow's celebration. "If my own flesh calls me unimportant," I whispered to myself, voice steady now, "then it's time I show them what importance truly means." The rehearsal buzzed on without me, blind to the storm taking shape inside. The rehearsal dinner glowed with golden light. The hotel ballroom had been dressed to impress. White linens, crystal glasses, centerpieces of lilies that reached too high, blocking sightlines between tables. Laughter bounced off the walls, the kind of polished laughter that made everyone sound like they were in on the same joke. At my table, though, the jokes never seemed to reach me. Marcellus played host with effortless charm, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, laughing from his chest. When his eyes slid toward me, the warmth stopped cold. His smile tightened, polite but sharp at the edges, as though just tolerating my presence. I sat quietly, folding the cloth napkin in my lap, watching the room spin around him. He was pulling everyone into his orbit, leaving me orbiting far on the outside. Between courses, he leaned close, lowering his voice so the others wouldn't hear. "What matters, Luther, is that Damon looks like he comes from strength. That means appearances. And appearances, well..." He let the word hang in the air, then tapped his wine glass with a finger. "Appearances cost money." I stared at him. He didn't even pretend anymore. To him, I was a line item, a checkbook in a chair. "That's the real respect you can show Damon," he added, straightening, as if he'd said something noble. My chest tightened. Words crowded behind my teeth, begging to spill out. But Damon was across the table, eyes fixed on his plate, shoulders tense. He wasn't going to step in. He wasn't going to defend me. I drew in a slow breath, swallowed the bitterness, and let silence speak for me. Later, when dessert was being served, I pulled out my phone, scanning through rehearsal notes I'd been sent earlier in the week. Something was missing. My speech, my blessing I had written carefully, was gone. No mention of it in the program. No space carved out for me to speak. I waited until Damon slipped away from the group, cornering him near the bar. Was my blessing cut out? My voice was low, almost steady. He shifted, avoiding my eyes. Marcellus thought it was unnecessary. He wants to keep things streamlined, no long speeches. The words landed heavier than I expected. To be erased from the ceremony was one thing. To have my voice stripped away from my son's day, that cut into bone. I didn't raise my voice, didn't beg or argue. I let the silence stretch until Damon finally looked up, uneasy. "Dad," he started, but the excuse trailed off. "When you silence a father, you silence your roots," I said softly, "and without roots, nothing stands." For the first time that evening, his composure cracked. Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But then the shield of Marcellus's influence slid back over him. He nodded stiffly and walked away. I stayed seated a little longer, the chatter of the dinner rolling on without me. No one noticed when I stood, folded my napkin, and left before dessert was cleared. My chair might as well have been empty all night. Out on the Boston street, the night air pressed cool against my face. I pulled my coat tighter, stepping into the glow of streetlights. My words had been silenced, my place diminished, my worth reduced to a wallet, but they hadn't reckoned with what silence could become. "If they won't hear my words tonight," I whispered, watching my breath curl into the dark, "they'll hear my actions tomorrow." Morning came heavy, the kind that presses down before a man even swings his legs out of bed. The memory of the rehearsal dinner clung like smoke, Marcellus's words gnawing at the edges. A hollowness had turned to steel overnight. No more pacing, no more hoping they would see me for what I was. Today I needed clarity from my son, not more half-smiles and silence. Coffee steamed in the chipped mug on my table, but it tasted of bitterness I couldn't wash down. The phone sat in front of me like a dare. I dialed Damon, steadying my breath, letting the firmness rise. When he answered, his voice carried the unease of a boy who knew he had wronged his father. "Hey, Dad, you okay?" "I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my tone calm but sharp enough to cut through excuses. "Are you cutting me out? Or is Marcellus cutting us both out?" There was a pause, long enough to feel like a lifetime. On the other end, I heard nothing but the weight of his silence. He stumbled finally. "It's complicated. He just thinks..." "Thinks what?" My voice didn't raise, but it tightened like a vice. "That a father's role ends at writing checks?" Damon didn't answer. His silence told me everything. My son had chosen stillness over defense, and that hurt worse than any insult Marcellus could throw. By afternoon, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Damon, it was Marcellus. His voice came slick, polished, as if rehearsed. "Luther, let's not dance around it. If you want to remain included in this wedding, your contribution has to match the event. 200,000 is the minimum. Otherwise, we'll simplify things." The words hit like a slap. They weren't even dressing it up anymore. This wasn't about prestige. It was extortion, delivered with the chill of entitlement. For a long moment, I said nothing. Let him think I was considering. Silence is its own weapon, and I wielded it better than he knew. When he finally hung up, I sat back, stunned less by the number than by the gall. They wanted me erased as a man, but useful as a wallet. That evening, Damon came by. His shoulders carried guilt, but not enough to shake Marcellus's hold. We sat at the kitchen table, the light dim, the air thick with what had gone unsaid for too long. "Dad," he started, but words seemed to crumble in his mouth. I didn't let him finish. If you allow someone to decide your father's worth in dollars, you'll regret it long after the wedding ends. My tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Every syllable was a nail hammered into the truth. He shifted in his chair, eyes darting everywhere but at me. The words had reached him. I could see the sting, but he was too entangled in Marcellus's web to pull free tonight. He muttered something about needing to go, stood without meeting my gaze, and left. The door shut softly, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. In the dim kitchen light, I whispered to the empty room, "They've mistaken my silence for surrender. That mistake will cost them." Resolve settled like stone. Tomorrow wouldn't be about pleas or warnings. It would be about action. The quiet of the house pressed in after Damon left. The words I had spoken to him still lingered in the air, but so did his silence. It was a silence that revealed how much power Marcellus had over him. For too long, I had carried silence as a burden. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I began to see it differently. Silence wasn't weakness. It could be sharpened into a tool, a weapon that spoke louder than their insults. The coffee in front of me had gone cold, untouched. I stared at the cup and thought of all the mornings Evelyn and I once shared in that same kitchen, her laughter filling the space. That laughter was long gone. All that remained was the reminder that I had built this family with sacrifice. And yet now I stood on the outside, erased by my own son's choices and his fiancé's arrogance. Something had to change, and it had to start with me. The phone call to Orville was short. He'd known me long enough to hear the tension in my voice. "I think it's time you introduced me to that lawyer friend you've mentioned before," I said. He didn't ask questions, just gave me a name and an address downtown. By late afternoon, I found myself walking into a modest office off Tremont Street. No marble floors or glass walls, just a small brass plaque that read, "Elliot Warren, Attorney at Law," inside. The waiting room smelled faintly of paper and coffee, the kind of scent that carried the weight of real work, not appearances. Elliot was a calm man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and a gaze that measured every word before it left his mouth. We shook hands, and when I explained why I was there, his expression shifted from polite interest to concern. "Mr. Jesperson," he said carefully, "I've reviewed some of the preliminary paperwork connected to the wedding venue and associated expenses. I need to ask, did you authorize the full payment agreements that were filed under your name?" I blinked, uncertain if I'd heard him right. "Filed under my name? I only agreed verbally to contribute some funds. And I haven't signed a single contract." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of documents with my name scrawled at the bottom. The handwriting was close to mine but not exact. I leaned closer, heart pounding, and saw my signature on a binding contract with the venue, committing me to a $200,000, $1,000 contribution. Another document, a so-called family contribution agreement, outlined my obligations as though I had sat down and signed willingly. The room seemed to tilt. Fraud wasn't just whispered insult or social exclusion. This was theft in plain daylight, wrapped in family ties. My own son's fiancé had crossed from cruelty into crime. Elliot watched me, his voice steady. "These aren't just questionable, Mr. Jesperson. If proven false, they're forgery. And forgery is a felony." The word cut sharper than any insult Marcellus had ever thrown at me. For the first time, my silence broke, not in anger, but in a deep, controlled breath. "I never signed these. Not one stroke of that pen belongs to me," Elliot nodded. "Then we'll need certified copies. If you choose, we can prepare for legal action, but I advise discretion until you're ready. Let them think you don't know." I sat back in the chair, the papers still burning in my hands. My instinct screamed for confrontation, for storming into the rehearsal dinner and throwing the forged documents in Marcellus's smug face. But another part of me, the part hardened by years of endurance, told me to wait. Let him believe I was the quiet old man in the corner. Let him underestimate me a little longer. When I left Elliot's office, I carried the copies tucked carefully in a folder under my arm. Outside, Boston's evening air was crisp. the city lights flickering against the Charles River. My silence had shifted again, from burden to weapon, and now to shield. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen. Marcellus Gacy. We'll talk tonight. Don't embarrass Damon. My grip tightened on the folder. He had no idea the ground beneath him was already cracking. He believed he controlled the game, but he'd just written his own downfall. The street lamp above me flickered once before glowing steady. I walked on, quiet, resolved. The battle was no longer about an invitation or a seat by the kitchen. It was about truth, dignity, and the worth of a father no amount of forged ink could erase. The text from Marcellus had been waiting like a thorn in my pocket all afternoon. We'll talk tonight. Don't embarrass Damon. His words were dressed as a warning, but underneath was a promise of confrontation. I tucked the forged contracts into a folder, slid it under my arm, and walked out into the Boston dusk. The apartment they shared was polished, expensive, and smelled faintly of citrus candles. Marcellus greeted me at the door with his bright, hollow smile. Damon stood a few steps behind him, shoulders tight, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. I could feel the setup before I even sat down. The table was set for dinner, but the atmosphere tasted of accusation. Through the meal, Marcellus carried the conversation as though he were hosting royalty. He complimented Damon's tie, poured the wine, recited stories about investors and families who understood prestige. All the while, Damon barely spoke, every so often. His gaze flickered toward me with an edge I had never known from my son. It was the kind of look that said he was holding something sharp in his pocket, waiting for the moment to draw it. When the plates were cleared, Marcellus leaned back with deliberate ease. He slid a small stack of printed papers across the table. Damon's hand trembled slightly as he pushed them toward me. These came to us earlier this week, Marcellus said smoothly. Emails confirming that you canceled several payments to the florist and venue, that you reconsidered your role. My eyes scanned the pages. Familiar letterhead. My name typed cleanly. My signature scrawled at the bottom of each. But they were lies. Every line of them. Damon's jaw clenched. Dad, why would you do this? His voice cracked, but anger steadied it. Why sabotage my wedding? Why pretend you were with us when you were planning to pull out all along? The sting cut deeper than I expected. To be accused by my son, my only son, was far worse than the insults from Marcellus. I kept my breath steady. I never sent these. Damon, you know me better than that. He shook his head. They came from your email address. They look real. How do I explain this? Dad, how do I defend you when this is what I'm handed? Marcellus sat back, arms folded, wearing the smug patience of a man who believed he had already won. I could have exploded, slammed my fist on the table, shouted the truth until the walls shook, but rage would have only confirmed the story Marcellus had staged. Instead, I let silence fill the space. Finally, I said, Damon, lies carry the weight you give them. I will not dignify forgeries with panic. Ask yourself who benefits from driving us apart. My son's face flushed red. Torn between loyalty and suspicion. You always think someone's against you. Maybe you just can't accept that this isn't your day. Maybe you can't see, I replied quietly, that a man who divides you from your father doesn't plan on keeping you whole. The words hung there. Damon shoved back his chair and stormed out, the door slamming like a final verdict. For a moment, the apartment was still except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then Marcellus leaned in, his voice a low whisper that dripped with triumph. You're one step away from losing him forever. Keep pushing, and he'll never look back. I met his gaze. Calm, steady. Only truth decides that. Not you. His smirk faltered, just for a second. That was enough. I stood, collected the forged papers, and left the apartment without another word. Boston's night air was sharp against my skin as I walked home. Each step felt heavier, but my resolve thickened with it. When I reached my door, something caught my eye, an envelope pushed under the threshold. No return address, no markings. Inside, a small flash drive lay wrapped in plain paper, with one word scrawled across it in marker. Proof. My heart steadied in my chest. The game had changed. The lies had been planted. But now someone had slipped me a key. I placed the drive carefully on my desk, sat back in the dim light, and whispered into the silence. The truth always leaves a trail. The war was no longer hidden, it had begun. The decision to confront them all at once was not made lightly. My gut told me it had to happen now, before the lies swallowed the last pieces of truth. Darlene Alcala agreed to let me use her office that evening. Away from the noise of the rehearsal dinner, I called Damon, Marcellus, and Orville. Each arrived with different expressions, Damon weary, Marcellus guarded, Orville steady, and Darlene quietly watchful as she closed the door behind us. The tension in that room was so heavy it seemed to sit on everyone's chest. I didn't waste time. From my coat pocket, I slid out the small flash drive that had appeared under my door the night before. My hands were steady as I pushed it across the desk and asked Darlene to load it onto her computer. The screen came alive with folders, bank transfers, emails, contracts. Each one painted a picture I had long suspected but hadn't been able to prove. Money shifted into hidden accounts, signatures forged, emails sent in my name that I had never written. The first file I opened showed a transfer labeled under my account, directing funds straight into Marcellus's control. Damon leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he read the subject lines. Final payment received. Confirmation of $200, $1,000 family contribution. His lips parted like he wanted to say something, but no words came. Marcellus moved quickly, his smooth voice cutting through the air. This is ridiculous. Anyone could have faked those. Do you really believe some anonymous envelope over me, Damon? His tone dripped with practiced outrage. Damon looked at me, torn. Dad, these look real. They are real, I said simply, my voice calm. Because I never sent them. Someone wanted you to believe I did. For a moment, silence hung. Then Orville cleared his throat and stepped forward. His presence in that room was no accident. I need to say something, he began, his voice gravelly but steady. 3 weeks ago, I saw Marcellus in the office at the venue. He was hunched over paperwork, and when he left, I saw the forms. They had Luther's name at the bottom, but the ink was fresh, too fresh. Marcellus's head whipped around, eyes flashing. You're lying. But Orville didn't flinch. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet. I didn't want to get involved, but I made a copy back then. Call it instinct. This matches the fake signature on those files. Darlene leaned over, studying both the printout and the documents on the screen. Her brows drew tight. It's true. The strokes don't line up with Luther's usual hand. I've seen him sign dozens of contracts over the years. Damon's face turned pale. His gaze darted from Orville to me, then back to Marcellus. The foundation of trust he had built his future on began to shake right in front of us. Finally, Damon stood, his voice trembling. Tell me the truth, Marcellus. Did you forge my father's name? Did you lie to me? Marcellus's mask cracked, fury spilling out. What does it matter? He was never on your side. He's old, bitter, and he never approved of us. I did what I had to do to protect our future. The words cut deeper than any knife. For the first time, Damon's anger turned, not at me, but at the man he thought he loved. Protect our future? By stealing from my father? By turning me against him? I sat quietly, watching, letting the storm finally break. Years of being silenced had taught me one truth. When the moment arrives, the truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand. Marcellus raged on, his voice filling the office. He wanted control. Damon, he wanted to hold his money over us, to remind you every day that you'd never escape his shadow. I refused to let that happen. And instead, I said softly, you made me your enemy. The room fell still. Damon looked at me, his eyes full of something raw, betrayal, heartbreak, confusion all tangled into one. He shook his head, unable to process the fracture that had just opened beneath his life. Without another word, he stormed out, the slam of the door echoing like a final verdict. Marcellus stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes burning into me. This isn't over, he hissed. You'll regret making me your enemy. I met his gaze without flinching. The only regret here will be yours, for mistaking greed for strength. when the office emptied, I sat in silence. Orville placed a steady hand on my shoulder before leaving. Darlene quietly shut down the computer, her eyes heavy with sympathy. Alone again. I felt no triumph, only the calm certainty that the war for my son's soul was still raging. The truth was out, but truth alone doesn't heal, it only exposes. The morning light crept through the blinds, but it didn't bring peace. A heaviness lingered from the night before, pressing down on the chest like a weight that couldn't be shaken. The silence of the apartment was thicker than usual, broken only by the creak of the radiator. Damon hadn't called. He hadn't returned. Each unanswered ring from the phone deepened the ache, confirming that distance was no longer measured in miles, but in trust lost. Whispers traveled faster than truth in this city. Before breakfast was even finished, the neighbors downstairs were already murmuring in the hall. Their voices drifted up, half gossip, half condemnation. Can you believe it? A whole wedding blown apart. They didn't have to say his name. The sting of their tone carried it well enough. Shame settled like dust, coating everything in a dull film of humiliation. The phone wouldn't stay quiet. Relatives from out of state, cousins who hadn't visited in years, suddenly felt entitled to weigh in. One accused him of destroying Damon's happiness, her words sharp and cruel. Another, softer but hesitant, admitted she always suspected Marcellus wasn't what he seemed. Every call split the family further apart, leaving scars in places that once held love. Vindication should have brought relief, but instead it came laced with loneliness. Each voice on the line a reminder of how fractured the family had become. By midday, the situation turned from emotional to financial. Darlene called from her office, her tone heavy with bad news. Vendors are demanding cancellation fees. Luther, they're looking at you or Damon to cover contracts. The numbers hit like cold water. $200,000 for a wedding that would never happen. What was once meant to be a day of joy now threatened to drown Damon in debts he never agreed to sign. The trap Marcellus laid was clearer than ever, a gilded cage built with forged signatures and false promises. The anger that had smoldered for days began to harden. Rage wasn't enough anymore. Precision would be needed, clarity sharper than the lies spun against him. Still, beneath that fire, sorrow remained. No father dreams of watching his child's future unravel this way. Orville stopped by that afternoon, carrying the weight of small-town news on his shoulders. He leaned against the doorframe, shaking his head. They're saying you ruined it out of jealousy. Luther, Marcellus is feeding them that story, and folks are eating it up. The words stung worse than the gossip downstairs. Friends crossed the street rather than meet his eyes, embarrassed to be near the scandal. Dignity, carefully built over a lifetime, was slipping away with each rumor repeated. But endurance had always been his companion. Humiliation could strip away reputation, but it couldn't erase truth. The proof was there, in the documents, in Orville's testimony, in the cracks already showing in Marcellus's facade. Holding on to that truth became the anchor against the storm. Evening fell. The apartment dim and hushed. The phone lit up once more. Not a call, but a voicemail. Damon's voice trembled with exhaustion. Dad, I don't know what to believe anymore, but I can't come home right now. Then the line cut, leaving a hollow space that echoed louder than any shouting match. The chair creaked as he leaned back, staring into the shadows. Heartbreak dug deep, but beneath it lay something stronger, a grim resolve. They mistook silence for surrender once. This time, silence would be the sharpened edge of the fight still to come. Rumors have a way of clinging like smoke. By the time a week had passed since that chaotic night at the venue, whispers had grown into printed words. Local newspapers carried the story of the canceled wedding, and online blogs latched onto it like hungry dogs. My name appeared in sentences twisted with blame, painted as the bitter old man who ruined his son's chance at happiness. Each step outside my apartment felt heavier. Even when I went for a walk along the Charles River, I could feel eyes on me. Strangers didn't need to speak aloud. Their smirks and side glances told me enough. The humiliation pressed down hard, yet not once did I raise my voice to defend myself. Silence became both my shield and my burden. Still, the quiet endurance ate at me, chipping away at the pride I'd held all my life. Every night as I set the kettle on the stove, I'd hear Marcellus's words echoing, "We only want important people." The phrase, recycled by gossipers, cut sharper each time. Days into this haze, Damon finally reached out. He showed up at my door late one evening, shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I saw not just my son, but a man unraveling under the weight of ridicule. He confessed in a low voice that his colleagues had started mocking him at the office. His once steady career was teetering, not because of his own failures, but because of the scandal wrapped around his wedding. "Dad, they call me reckless," he admitted, rubbing his temples. "Some even say I'm naive, letting Marcellus handle everything. I can't escape it at work. My job. It's on the line." The pain in his voice cut through me more than any headline. I wanted to take his hand, remind him he was still my son, but he was already pulling away, as if the shame made him unworthy of comfort. I steadied my voice and told him the truth he'd avoided hearing. "Son, your worth isn't measured by what others whisper, nor by what Marcellus dictates. You've let him tie your name to his schemes, and unless you break free, you'll lose more than a job. You'll lose yourself." He looked at me then, torn between loyalty to a fiancé who had burned him and the father he had cast aside. His silence was answer enough. He still wasn't ready to cut the cord. The next morning, I walked into a lawyer's office. A man I trusted laid documents across the desk, contracts Marcellus had attempted to sign under Damon's name, financial commitments built on fraud. My signature had once been forged, but now Marcellus had turned Damon into the legal mule for his ambition. The lawyer explained that there were avenues to fight back. Fraud charges could be pursued, damages could be recovered, yet the cost would be dragging Damon further through public disgrace, branding his wedding not just as a failure, but a scandalous con. The decision weighed on me like a stone: protect my son's pride or expose the truth fully. For a long moment, I stared at the contracts, seeing not just ink but the chains Marcellus had locked around Damon. The answer wasn't easy, but it was clear. Protecting Damon silently had only emboldened Marcellus. Now, silence had to give way to action. That evening, the neighborhood fundraiser became the unexpected battlefield. The hall buzzed with polite chatter, but tension crackled underneath. Midway through, whispers spread as documents were handed around, papers that tied Marcellus directly to fraudulent dealings. I hadn't planted them, but truth has a way of surfacing when the lies grow too heavy to hold. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some who had judged me a week earlier now looked at Marcellus with suspicion. Witnesses stepped forward, voices steady as they recounted his manipulations. Orville's testimony matched the evidence, and Darlene confirmed details from her dealings with the venue. Marcellus's face twisted from charm to fury. He lashed out, calling me bitter, calling me envious, but the room had shifted. Damon, standing among the guests, could no longer ignore the weight of proof stacked against the man he had chosen to marry. His shoulders sagged as realization dawned, not because I had spoken, but because the truth had finally cornered his fiancée. The confrontation burned hot. Damon's eyes filled with shame as Marcellus barked, "Your father's been against me from the start. He'll stop at nothing." Marcellus was exposed. In a storm of anger, Marcellus shoved his way through the crowd and stormed out of the fundraiser, shouting over his shoulder, "This isn't finished, old man!" His words rang hollow, desperate. The room quieted, all eyes drifting to Damon. My son stood frozen, lips pressed shut, unable to defend Marcellus or himself. The shame was etched across his face like a scar that would not fade. As the crowd dispersed, I steadied myself, breathing deeply. I had endured their scorn, and now I'd seen their doubt shift. My fight was not done. Justice would not rest until Marcellus's grip was fully broken. Inside, a quiet vow formed. This battle wasn't over, not until my son could stand free of the chains Marcellus had wound around him. The courthouse steps felt colder than the wind that morning. A faint drizzle had turned the granite slick, and each step echoed louder than it should have. Walking inside, every sound, the shuffle of shoes, the clatter of keys, the faint coughs, seemed to press down on the chest. Faces I didn't know turned briefly, then looked away, their curiosity quickly replaced by the silence that surrounds a man dragged into public scandal. The preliminary hearing was not a trial, but it carried the weight of one. My lawyer set a neat stack of documents on the polished wooden table, contracts, bank statements, forged signatures, all of it laid bare. Across from me, Marcellus lounged back in his chair, tie perfectly knotted, eyes flashing contempt. He denied everything with a cool smile, insisting this was nothing but a vendetta. His words sounded polished, but hollow. Damon sat behind him, not beside me, shoulders hunched, eyes down, as though afraid of being recognized as my son. Each denial from Marcellus drove a deeper wedge, but every page my lawyer presented made the truth harder to ignore. Still, the silence from Damon cut sharper than any lie. When the gavel struck to adjourn, relief didn't come. Instead, the ache of seeing my own flesh stand in shadows while a stranger lied in broad daylight grew unbearable. Outside the courthouse, the spring air was raw, the drizzle now a thin mist. Damon followed me out, his steps dragging. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then the words tumbled out, rough and uneven. "I knew things were wrong," he whispered. I wanted to believe him. I wanted someone to tell me I mattered. That's why I let it go." Hearing that nearly buckled my knees. The man who once held my hand as a child now confessed he had ignored mine. I steadied myself and forced calm into my voice. "Respect doesn't come from money or appearances, Damon. It comes from standing by what's right, even when it costs you. You let someone measure your worth in dollars, and you let him measure mine the same way." His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. The truth had finally slipped past his defenses, and it left him raw. For the first time in weeks, I felt a thread of my son still there, frayed but not broken. We didn't expect Kendra to be waiting at the base of the courthouse steps. My granddaughter ran forward, clutching her small backpack, confusion etched across her face. "Why is everyone so mad at each other?" she asked, her voice high and trembling. Neither of us had an answer ready. Damon knelt, struggling to speak. I crouched beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes," I said softly, "grown-ups forget what's really important, but we'll remember again. We have to." Her innocent gaze pierced through layers of betrayal and pride. Damon wiped his eyes quickly, and for a moment, the man I raised was visible again. It wasn't absolution, but it was something, a sliver of light cutting into weeks of darkness. That evening, back in the small kitchen that had become both fortress and prison, I let the weight fall from my shoulders. The smell of brewed coffee filled the air as I sat in silence. For the first time in weeks, my chest loosened, if only slightly. Marcellus had been exposed, if only partially, and Damon had finally spoken the truth aloud. The wounds wouldn't heal overnight. Family doesn't mend with a single confession, but cracks had appeared in the lies. That alone brought the faintest sense of relief. I stared at the empty chair across the table, imagining what it would feel like to share one more meal as a whole family. The thought hurt, but it carried hope too. Fragile, but alive. The phone rang just as the clock struck 9. My lawyer's voice came through low. "Urgent. Marcellus is planning something drastic. Be prepared." The line went dead, leaving only the faint buzz in my ear. I gripped the phone tighter, eyes narrowing on the papers spread before me. "I've been prepared all my life," I whispered into the quiet room. The fight wasn't over. The final storm was gathering. The courthouse hummed with a tense silence that pressed against the walls like a storm about to break. Rows of faces filled the benches, neighbors, vendors, and strangers drawn by the scandal. At the front, Marcellus sat upright, arrogance still draped across his shoulders, though cracks had begun to show. When the judge entered, the entire room stilled. Papers shuffled, and the truth that had been simmering for weeks finally found its voice. The prosecutor laid out contracts, bank transfers, and forged signatures. Each detail tore away a layer of Marcellus's performance. The smug smile he had worn so faithfully faltered as whispers rippled through the crowd. Every lie exposed him further until the mask he clung to collapsed entirely. Damon sat one row away, jaw tight, his eyes glued to the man he had once believed in. For the first time, Damon didn't look to me for approval or escape. He faced the wreckage head-on. The judge turned, her voice measured but sharp. "Mr. Kraft, where do you stand in this?" The silence felt endless. Damon's hands trembled as he rose. His voice cracked at first, then steadied. "I was blind. I let myself be led by promises of prestige and the illusion of importance. I turned my back on the man who raised me." His eyes locked with mine. "Dad, I failed you. I failed myself. If you can forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life earning back your trust." 100 emotions surged inside me. Anger, grief, relief, pride. They fought for space. But what left my lips was plain and firm. Repentance is the first step. Damon, trust isn't given. It's rebuilt. If you want redemption, it begins today. Marcellus erupted then, his composure fully gone. "You'll regret this. You think this old man is your savior. He's nothing." His shouting filled the chamber, wild and frantic, until security stepped forward and escorted him out. His threats faded down the hall, leaving behind only the echo of his downfall. Damon watched with hollow eyes as the man he once thought he loved was dragged away, exposed not as a partner, but as a predator. I looked at Marcellus one last time, not with hatred, but with pity for a youth wasted in greed. When the gavel struck, silence reclaimed the room. We walked out into the spring air, the sun finally breaking through Boston's gray sky. Damon walked beside me, shoulders lowered, no longer carrying pretense. On the courthouse steps, Kendra came running, her small arms wrapping tightly around my waist. "Grandpa," she squealed, clinging like I was the anchor she'd been waiting for. Damon's eyes welled up. He whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us." I placed a hand on his shoulder. Family isn't kept by money or appearances. It's kept by truth, and by the courage to protect it. For the first time in weeks, there was no bitterness in my voice, only the steady weight of experience. That evening, I took Kendra to the park. The air smelled of cut grass and thawing earth, children's laughter echoing from the swings. We sat together on a bench, her hand resting in mine, warm and trusting. I spoke softly, though my words carried far beyond her small ears. Wealth reveals who we are. Betrayal can cut through blood, but dignity, once lost, cannot be bought back. We guard family not with vanity, but with values, and when we fail, the only way back is through truth. The setting sun painted the park in gold, shadows stretching long. I rose, taking Kendra's hand again. With each step, the noise of gossip, betrayal, and greed grew smaller behind us. What remained was peace, and the quiet certainty that legacy isn't measured in dollars or headlines. It's measured in the strength of what we stand for when everything else falls away.